Why is it that these same lifestyle changes can affect so many of the most common and costly chronic diseases? And the answer is they all share the same underlying biological mechanisms: chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome, in telomeres, in gene expression, and so on. And each one of these mechanisms, in turn, is directly influenced, for better and for worse, by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have.
Longevity, of course, living longer, but I think what people really want, which is where your advice comes in, is living longer, healthier. So are there particular foods?
Fear is not really a sustainable motivator, but what is sustainable is joy and love and pleasure and feeling good. And when you make these changes, most people feel so much better so quickly in ways that really matter to them.
I'm a clinician. I feel like I'm a natural skeptic until all the trials come out and I see the data. If this approach is working, why isn't the standard protocol across all the healthcare systems?
This is Second Opinions. I'm Christina Farr.
I'm Zenooz.
And I'm Luba Greenwood.
Welcome to the pod, where each week we navigate what's really going on in healthcare through strikingly candid conversations with the entrepreneurs and investors leading the charge.
Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in. Make sure you stick around at the end of the interview for our debrief.
All right. Hello, everybody. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Dean Ornish, who is a distinguished clinical professor of medicine at UCSF, founder of Preventative Medicine Research Institute. Dr. Ornish is not only a pioneering cardiologist, but he's also a leading advocate for lifestyle medicine. Dr. Ornish, you're famously known for the Ornish Diet, which I believe it's your research on reversing heart disease that includes a combination of stress management and diet and activity, and I'm sure you'll tell us all about it. I think we can safely say for the last few decades, you've profoundly influenced the way we think about health, wellness, longevity, and the power of how lifestyle can actually change and reverse chronic diseases. So welcome to the podcast, and we're so excited to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So let's start off maybe with, you're a cardiologist, and I would think that you would sort of go down the traditional path, but somewhere along the way you veered off and focused a lot more on lifestyle medicine, specifically focusing on developing this diet. Can you tell me what drew you to this and, how'd you get here?
I'm often thought of as a cardiologist. My training is actually in internal medicine. And I went to medical school at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston and was on Michael DeBakey's surgical service at a time when he was really one of the inventors of bypass surgery. And we'd cut people open, we bypass their clogged arteries. He'd tell them usually at the time, okay, you're cured. And more often than not, they'd go home and do all the things that had caused the problem in the first place. Eat junk food, smoke cigarettes, not manage stress, not exercise. And often their new bypasses would clog up and then we'd cut them open again, sometimes multiple times. So for me, bypass surgery was literally bypassing the problem rather than also treating the cause. And so I was a second-year medical student at the time, and I thought, well, what would happen if we actually treated the cause? So I went to this place that they used to have called libraries with these things called books that were kind of paper bound together. And I kind of just got immersed in that. And I learned that in dogs and cats and pigs and rabbits and monkeys, you could cause them to get heart disease if you put them on a typical American diet or made them smoke or didn't let them exercise or put them under emotional stress. But you could reverse it if you change those things. That our bodies often have this remarkable capacity to begin healing if we stop what's causing the problem. One of the nice things about being a medical student is you're not fully indoctrinated. So I thought, okay, so I took a year off between my second and third years of medical school, did a pilot study of 10 patients, and 8 of the 10 got better after just a month. And we found that they not only felt better, their angina went away in most cases, but using what was then a new test called thallium scans to measure blood flow or perfusion of the heart, we found that 8 of the 10 showed improved blood flow to the heart. So in a sense, we were reversing heart disease. And at the time, it was thought that people viewed heart disease then the way they view Alzheimer's today, which is that once you had it, the best you could hope to do was slow down the rate at which you got worse. In other words, get worse more slowly. But we found for the first time that you could actually, instead of getting worse over time, you could actually get better and quickly. Now, it was also my first understanding that when you're doing something that doesn't fit within the conventional wisdom, it's not usually met with great acceptance. People said, well, that can't be, the test must be wrong. I said, look, you did the tests. These are the same tests we send people to bypass surgery with every day. Why are they suddenly not working? And well, did you control for the time of day you tested the patient? Like, who does that? Anyway, so I went back to school. And I should tell you, just parenthetically, when I was on Dr. DeBakey's service, he said, "What year are you, son?" I said, "I'm starting my third year." He goes, "Damn, it's going to be so much harder to bust you out of here with all these weird ideas you have." And somehow I made it. He's the kind of guy who would like stick you with a needle if you didn't move your hand fast enough out of the operating field, and you'd have to, get a hepatitis test back then.
Yeah, for those folks who don't know Dr. DeBakey, he's like a very famous cardiac surgeon.
Yes, there's a big statue of him at Baylor now. He actually called me 4 years ago out of the blue. I hadn't talked to him in decades. And he said, "Hey, Dean, this is Mike DeBakey." He had a very distinctive Louisiana accent that I recognized after all these years. I said, "So what do I have this honor?" He goes, "Well, those weird ideas I used to give you such a hard time about when you were my medical student?" I said, "Yeah, I remember really well." He goes, "That's what's kept me alive all these years." He said, "I'm almost 100 years old. I'm 99. My wife got interested in your work. It really helped me. I just thought you'd like to know before I died."
I mean, I'm a clinician. I feel like I'm a natural skeptic until like all the trials come out and I see the data. And so, of course, I remember, I think maybe it was in the 90s was your first big landmark study, right, on this stuff. And I have to say, I mean, it makes sense if you eat well and, you exercise that you're going to be healthy, but reversing cardiac disease, I was like, no way that's going to happen. And then I remember watching the internal medicine doctor who would come on, maybe it was a video that you showed, and it was about how he had 15% cardiac function from a heart attack and went on your program and has sort of reversed the disease. And I thought that was like, wow, like this is amazing. Why isn't the standard protocol across all the healthcare systems?
So we did that first study, went back to school, got my MD, then took another year off, did a randomized trial, just a month long. And we found that the ability of the heart to pump blood improved over that time, whereas it got worse in the control group. And we published that in JAMA. Went to Boston to do my medical residency at Mass General and my fellowship at Harvard, moved to San Francisco, and began the study that you're referring to called the Lifestyle Heart Trial, which was the most definitive study. We used quantitative arteriography to measure how much blockage there was and cardiac PET scans to measure blood flow. And we found that after 1 year, the arteries got less clogged in the intervention group, more clogged in the control group, and even more improvement, less clogging after 5 years than after 1 year, whereas they got even more clogged after 5 years in the usual care group. And we published that in the Lancet after 1 year and JAMA after 5 years. And that was pretty much the definitive study showing, and that really helped change people's thinking. But like you, I thought, well, that's going to really change medical practice. And to some degree it did, but not nearly as much as I'd hoped. And I realized that science is a really important determinant, but so is reimbursement. We're trained to use drugs in surgery. We get reimbursed to do that, and that's what most people do. And in fact, I'm on the nutrition working group of the American College of Cardiology. We published a paper a few years ago. The average doctor gets 4 hours per year of nutrition training, and the average cardiology fellow in 4 years of fellowship gets none. So, but I thought if we could get Medicare to cover this, that would change things, because if Medicare covers it, most other people do. And if you change reimbursement, you change not only medical practice, but even medical education. And that's been happening. So it's a much slower process than I would have liked, but things are really changing. We then found that these same lifestyle changes, many of these people had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, and those got better over time as well. We did a study with Craig Venter. We found that over 500 genes were changed in just 3 months when people make these same lifestyle changes, turning on the genes that keep us healthy, turning off the ones that cause us to get sick. We did a study with Elizabeth Blackburn, the Nobel laureate, and we found for the first time that we could lengthen telomeres. And when we published this, the Lancet editors called it the first study showing that lifestyle changes may reverse aging at a cellular level. And just a few months ago in May, we published the first randomized trial showing that anything, in this case, these same lifestyle changes, could often stop or reverse the progression of men and women with early stage Alzheimer's disease.
This is very exciting. I mean, you're listing out everything. I know that our listeners really want to dig in and get some advice. So especially for longevity, longevity, of course, living longer. But I think what people really want, which is where your advice comes in, is living longer, healthier. So with chronic disease and having a longer lifespan as a healthy individual. So what are, especially in that study, I mean, are there particular foods, or is it really just don't eat that much meat, don't eat fat, don't eat sugar, exercise and sleep well, don't stress out? Is that it? Or is there a hack potentially, 2-3 foods that we can eat, load up on turmeric or something? Tell us.
Yeah, well, good question. So my wife and I co-authored a book called Undo It, which puts forth this radical unifying theory. Like, why is it that these same lifestyle changes, which I'll talk about in a moment, in all of these studies I just mentioned? Why is it, in the era of personalization, why is it that the same lifestyle changes can affect so many of the most common and costly chronic diseases? And the answer is that they're not nearly as different as we thought when I was going through my training and probably when you were going through yours. In other words, they all share the same underlying biological mechanisms: chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome and telomeres, in gene expression, angiogenesis, overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, immune function, and so on. And each one of these mechanisms, in turn, is directly influenced, for better and for worse, by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, whether or not we smoke, and how much love and support we have. Or to reduce it to its essence, to eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. The book begins with one of my favorite quotes attributed to Einstein, that he said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So it's basically a whole foods, plant-based diet, essentially a vegetarian diet, low in fat, low in sugar, low in refined carbs and processed foods, moderate exercise, like an hour a day of walking and some resistance training, meditation and yoga-based stress management techniques, and support groups. And the support groups are not just designed to help people stay on the diet. They're a powerful intervention in their own right, as Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, has been writing about for many years. I actually wrote a book about this back in 1990 called Love and Survival, that people who are lonely and depressed are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely than those who aren't. So it radically simplifies the message we give people. It's not like, here's your longevity diet, here's your heart disease diet, here's your diabetes diet, here's your prostate cancer diet. We also, by the way, did the first randomized trial with the heads of urology at both UCSF, where I'm a full professor, and at Sloan Kettering in New York, that these same lifestyle changes could slow stop and reverse the progression of men with low-grade early-stage prostate cancer. So these findings, I think, are really giving many people new hope and new choices they didn't have before.
Hey everyone, we'll get right back to the conversation after a word from our sponsors.
This show is sponsored by Midi Health. There are certain things that come with age: wisdom, experience, and knowledge, to name just a few. But if you're a woman over 40, it can also bring some less desirable things: hot flashes, insomnia, brain fog, moodiness, and weight gain, all symptoms of menopause and perimenopause. Yes, hormonal transition is a fact of life, but that doesn't mean you should have to accept its symptoms as just another part of aging. The experts at Midi Health understand what you're going through and know how to help. Midi Health is the only virtual care clinic for women navigating midlife hormonal transition. They support you with safe, effective, FDA-approved medications, as well as supplements, lifestyle coaching, and preventative health guidance. What's more, all their services are covered by insurance, and they're conveniently accessible through telehealth visits and 24/7 messaging. If you're over 40, use all that wisdom you've gained over the years and visit Midi Health. You deserve to feel great. Book your virtual visit today at joinmidi.com. That's joinmidi.com.
So, Dr. Ornish, I read that former President Bill Clinton is one of your famous patients. And I remember you saying something about, you had dinner with him, you kind of told him about all the stuff you were working on. Did that lead to you, like, the next day getting a call from CMS and saying, oh my God, you've made phenomenal change. You sold the president on this stuff. Let's get you a CPT code?
First, the guy that you mentioned earlier, the doctor who was told his ejection fraction was down between 11 and 15%. He had such a massive heart attack that his heart was barely pumping. And he was told that only a heart transplant could keep him alive. And while waiting to find a donor, usually someone, who gets killed on a motorcycle, he went through my reversing heart disease program at UCLA to get in better shape for the heart transplant. But his heart improved so much during that time, he didn't need one. His ejection fraction went from 11 to 15% to 30% in just 9 weeks. Now, I like this story because people think, oh, dying in life, so that's kind of boring. How powerful could that be? It's got to be something really high-tech and expensive to be powerful: a new drug, a new laser, a new device, a surgical procedure. And I think, again, our unique contribution has been using these very high-tech, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very low-tech and low-cost interventions could be. Besides not having, that was 8 years ago, and he's still doing well. He'd probably be on his second heart transplant by now. And that, heart transplant is over $1 million, and you have to take immunosuppressive drugs the rest of your life, and so on. With President Clinton, I began working with him shortly after he became president in 1993. Hillary Clinton asked me to work with the chefs that cook for them at the White House and Camp David and Air Force One. I would come in for his annual physical at Walter Reed and the Bethesda Naval Hospital. And then when he had a heart attack and bypass surgery, they reached out And again, I would never talk about this publicly, except for he already did, and began working with them. And whatever one's politics are, when a former US president, especially one who was known for jogging to McDonald's in his own words, begins to follow this program, and he's now been doing it for many, many years, I think that sets a great example for everybody. Now, what you're referring to is the conversation I had with him after I initially met with the people at Medicare, and we were having dinner one night, just the two of us at the White House, and I told him what was going on. He said, "Well, maybe I can help." I said, "Well, great. You're the president of the United States. You're the head of the executive branch." And like you, I thought, "Oh, he'll just make a phone call and that'll do it." 16 years later, we got Medicare coverage. It's a long process, but it was worth it because, again, if you change reimbursement, you change medical practice and even medical education. So they created a separate code, a program called Intensive Cardiac Rehabilitation with its own billing code. And now that Medicare is covering it, Aetna and Blue Shield and Blue Cross and several of the other companies are also covering it. And, I designed this program because I didn't want it to be just for wealthy people. I wanted it to be for everybody. So it doesn't really cost anything. You need a pair of walking shoes, a yoga mat. It's a less expensive way to eat, and you spend more time with your friends and families and loved ones. Also, Medicare 6 years ago began covering our program, and we do it by Zoom, which is really great because now you can do it. You don't have to drive anywhere. You can do it from the comfort of your own home, and we do it all via Zoom. And so now everybody has access to it. Before, a person had to live within driving distance of one of the hospitals or clinics we train. Now you can live anywhere. And also, before, a lot of people couldn't afford to take off work or get childcare or get transportation, and now they can do it from home. We even provide them their first 2 weeks of meals for free while they're learning how to cook and shop and eat out. And because these biological mechanisms are so dynamic, even 2 weeks of being on this program makes the chest pain go away. And then they go, "Oh, okay, this isn't just about fear, about preventing another heart attack from happening. This is about joy and love and pleasure and feeling good because now I can make love with my spouse or play with my kids or go back to work and do all the things that I wasn't able to do before."
So let me ask you about the joy and also joy of food. Meat, as an example. A lot of people really like meat. They swear by carnivore diet. So there are a few questions in this one question. So if you don't mind answering a bunch of them. So one is, what do you think of carnivore diet? And I have to say, there are some chronic diseases such as Crohn's and others where people are challenged with having enough, let's say, iron ingested. So they cannot take iron supplements and others. So it's really hard. You would have to eat a ton of lentils in order to get that type of iron. So, and some people swear by it and they show examples of doing really well on carnivore diet. And what do you think about the other fads? No gluten. I'm very curious what you think of gluten. I'm also very curious about what you think of other fringe diets, such as alkaline foods and everything. So if you don't mind going through the list, what are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, well, meat is not good for you. I mean, I grew up in Texas eating meat every day, several times a day, but I love to tell people what they want to hear, that meat is healthy, but it's not.
Oh, how do you get iron? Do you think that you can get enough iron, especially if you're not absorbing nutrients and you have an underlying condition? How do you get it?
Well, putting Crohn's disease aside, yes, you can definitely get enough iron on a diet like this. We measure all of the, ferritin, total iron binding capacity, iron levels, et cetera. And people do not get iron deficient on this diet. But again, you can always take an iron supplement if you're concerned about that, but you don't need that. In fact, iron is an oxidant. And so when people are taking iron, especially if they're guys or postmenopausal women, it actually oxidizes cholesterol to a form that makes it more likely to end up in your arteries. And it's not just the saturated fat in meat or the cholesterol. And as you know, cholesterol is only found in animal products. It's the animal protein itself that's atherogenic, that is inflammatory. And so studies after study have shown that when people switch from a meat-based diet to a plant-based diet, they actually get a double benefit. They're not only not increasing their risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, prostate, breast, colon cancer, Alzheimer's disease are all linked with increased red meat, but you're also getting protective effects. So the plant-based diet not only doesn't increase your risk, it actually protects against that. And for example, in the Alzheimer's study we did, we put people on the same lifestyle in all these different studies that we did. And as you know, there have only been 3 drugs that have been approved in the last 20 years for treating Alzheimer's. And all 3 of them just slow down the rate at which you get worse, and not even by that much. And they're $30,000 to $50,000 per person. 21% of people get side effects like bleeding into their brain. And yet we found that, but getting worse more slowly is still getting worse. So the suicide rate after being diagnosed with Alzheimer's is 7 times higher in the month that follows because they take all your hope away. And when you lose your memories, you lose everything. My mom died of it. I have one of the genes for it. So I have a personal interest in this. So we found for the first time that these same lifestyle changes in only 20 weeks, in the majority, over 71% of the people in one of the tests we did, stopped or reversed the progression of their early stage Alzheimer's disease. Their cognition and function improved. They'd say things like, I couldn't read a book before. I'd read the same paragraph over and over again. Now I can. I couldn't watch a movie. I couldn't follow the plot. I couldn't do my taxes. Now I can. It's Sanjay Gupta actually did a documentary for CNN where he filmed this over 5 years and showed that even after 5 years, the person he focused on is actually doing even better. So these findings are really giving many people new hope and new choices that they didn't have before. Now, as far as gluten, there are, there are maybe a small percentage of people who have real gluten sensitivity, intolerance of that. But for the most part, it's fine. For some people, gluten is inflammatory. For many people, it's not. If you have an interest in that, try eliminating it and see if you feel better. That's one of the easiest ways to do that. There are lots of other diets out there, but again, what sets our work apart, not just the diet, but all of it, I'm known as the father of lifestyle medicine, which is using lifestyle changes to not only prevent, but to treat and often reverse the progression of disease, is that we have 45 years of randomized controlled trials and clinical trials published in the leading peer-reviewed journals, covered by Medicare, which, nobody else really has. And I think that's important because the whole point of science, as you all know, and why your podcast is so great, is to help people differentiate what's true and what isn't, what works and what doesn't for whom and under what circumstances, to kind of cut through all the hype that people often say. And I think nowhere is there more misinformation than in the field of nutrition.
I know that you said Medicare covers this. What about commercial insurance? How do folks who are not on Medicare get access to this program?
Yeah, well, Aetna's been covering it nationwide. We go through their medical policy review board every year. Blue Shield of California, and many of the others are covering it on a case-by-case basis. And over time, I think that pretty much everyone will, because we've shown that not only is it the right thing for the patients in terms of getting better, it saves a lot of money very quickly. We did one study with Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield, where they found that they cut their costs in half in the first year compared to a control group that was matched for age and gender and disease severity, and by fourfold in the first year when they looked at the high-cost patients, those that they'd spent more than $25,000 on in the preceding year. We did a study with Mutual of Omaha where they found that almost 80% of people who would have had a stent or bypass with their doctor's permission went on our program as a direct alternative, and they saved almost $30,000 per patient in the first year. And it's important to show cost savings in the first year because 30% of people change insurance companies every year. So the insurance companies say, look, we don't want to spend money if they're going to be somewhere else in a year or two. But by showing that in the first year, then they're really embracing it. And so this really is transforming in so many different areas now.
Approximately how many patients do you think you've put on this program? And of all those folks you put on the program, how many do you think have stayed on this diet after 1 year?
Well, we have data on over 20,000 people that we've collected. But, millions of people have done it from reading my books, and many people are able to do it from reading the books alone. Some people need more support. So Medicare and other insurance companies were paying for 72 hours of training. It's 4 hours twice a week for 9 weeks. So they get an hour of exercise, an hour of meditation, an hour of a support group, and an hour of a lecture. Now, 93% of the people who start our program finish all 72 hours of that, which is unheard of. I mean, to put that in context, 2/3 of people prescribed cholesterol-lowering drugs like statins are not taking them just 2 or 3 months later. And you say, well, that's just taking a pill once a day, and there are proven benefits in people who need them. Why are more people changing their lifestyle, which is really hard, than taking a pill? And the reason is that the pill doesn't make you feel better, but the lifestyle changes do. And there's no point, many people think, like, fear is not really a sustainable motivator. We're seeing that, in politics as well as in the world in general. And that, for like a month or so after you've been diagnosed with a heart attack, or you've had a stent or a bypass, they've got your attention. You'll do pretty much anything that the doctor or nurse says, maybe for, a month or two. And then the fear comes back. The denial comes back. We all know we're going to die, right? The mortality rate is 100%. It's one per person. We don't think about it most of the time. And so because we don't want to think about it most of the time, efforts that say, you might die if you don't do this, don't really register for more than a month or so. But what is sustainable is joy and love and pleasure and feeling good. And when you make these changes, most people feel so much better so quickly in ways that really matter to them. Like I mentioned before, like someone who can't do all the things that make life worth doing. And now they can. They say, gosh, I like eating junk food, but not that much, because what I gain is so much more than what I give up. Not just preventing something bad from happening years down the road, like a heart attack or stroke that I don't want to think about, but I don't get chest pain anymore. I can do all the things that I couldn't do before. And so that's an equation that really is sustainable.
So let me ask you, Dr. Ornish, I know you've spent quite some time in Boston during your Harvard days at MGH, but now you live in San Francisco, correct? And I love going to California. I usually feel comfortable going to any restaurant. First of all, the weather outside is nice. I can go to any restaurant, regardless of price, expensive, not expensive restaurants. I always know that almost everything on the menu is thoughtfully prepared. They're usually list out all the ingredients, and people go above and beyond what I would even do, and it's usually very healthy. So that's fantastic. I'm in Boston. A lot of our listeners are in Boston, East Coast, New York, Chicago, other places that are very cold. It is so miserable to even leave your house. You leave your house, there's a cold blast that hits your face. You can't even breathe. It's just awful. So is there some minimal thing that one can do? I completely agree with you. When it's nice weather, whenever there's spring, everybody comes out. We're all so happy. We go for walks. We even talk to others, and we go for walks with others. Now we've incorporated working and walking. We all try to do all those things. But what do we do for the other, I would say, 3-4 months out of the year when it is so cold, miserable, dark, other than drinking, which now we know you can't even have a sip. It's so bad for you. What do you recommend? Is there minimal exercise and a minimal thing you can eat, maybe an avocado or two per day to keep this going until April? Trust me, we will all follow whatever you tell us to do. We will do it.
Yeah, well, it is really cold in Boston and New York. There are actually more I find it much easier to find a vegetarian restaurant in Boston and New York than in the Bay Area, surprisingly. The food here is not necessarily, it's very gourmet, but it's not necessarily very healthy. Number one. Number two is that one of the findings we found in all of our studies was that the more you change, the more you improve in every way we can measure. I thought incorrectly when I began doing this work that people who had less severe disease or who were younger would do better, but I was wrong. It wasn't how old or sick they were. The more you change your lifestyle, the more you improve across the spectrum, from the people who didn't change at all to the people who changed a lot. So I wrote a book called The Spectrum years ago that was based on this finding. If you're just trying to prevent disease, stay healthy, that it's not all or nothing. So I categorized foods from the most healthy group 1 to the least healthy group 5, and said what matters most is your overall way of eating, living. So if you indulge yourself the whole language of behavioral change in food in particular has what I call this kind of fascist nurse ratchet, wagging their finger. I can't go out to dinner. I'm sure you probably can't either without people either commenting on what you're eating or apologizing for what they're eating. I have to go, you're forgiven. I'm not the food police, but still, I cheated on my diet. Once you call foods good or bad, it's a very small step to saying I'm a bad person because I like bad foods. And at that point, just bring out the cheeseburger because you're a bad person, etc. So to get away from all that, and I've also learned that even more than being healthy, people want to feel free and in control. This goes back to the first dietary intervention, when God said, don't eat the apple, and that didn't go so well. And so what I've learned is to say, look, instead of calling foods good or bad, say, let's say you came to me, you said, okay, Luba, why are you here? Well, I want to get my LDL down 50 points, or I want to get my blood pressure down 10 points, or I want to get my A1C down a point, or I want to, whatever. I said, great. What are you eating now? Well, I'm eating mostly unhealthy group 4 and 5 foods, the usual suspects, fried donuts and cheeseburgers and whatever. How much are you willing to change? Oh, no one's ever asked me that before. They're always telling me what to do. I don't know. I'll eat less of the unhealthy 4 and 5 and more of the 1 through 3, but I'll still eat some unhealthy foods. Great. How much exercise are you getting? Not that much, especially when it's cold. How much are you willing to do? Oh, I don't know. I'll walk 15 minutes a day. Great. How much meditation and yoga are you doing? 0. How much are you willing to do? I don't know. I'll meditate 10 minutes a day. Great. How much time are you spending with your friends and family? Not enough. I'll spend more. Great. We'll support it. We'll track it. A month later, you come back and by the way, there's no shame. There's no judgment. It's the most compassionate thing, because if you indulge yourself one day, it doesn't mean you cheated or you're bad or you failed. Just eat healthier the next, If you don't have time to exercise one day, do a little more the next. You don't have time to meditate for an hour, do it for a minute. Whatever you do, there's a corresponding benefit. So let's say you come back a month later and you say, wow, look at that. But your LDL's down 30 points and you wanted to get it down 50. That's amazing. So now just eat a little more from the healthier end of the spectrum, a little more exercise, a little more meditation, a little more time with your friends and family. That'll probably do it. So that's a much more sustainable approach. But if you're trying to reverse a life-threatening disease, what's the pound of cure as opposed to the ounce of prevention? It's hard to do that. That's why we were the first to do it in all these different areas, because most people didn't go far enough. And it takes a lot. It's prescriptive. So the Undo It book that my wife Ann and I wrote is how to reverse disease. And it requires, I mean, one of the things we've learned is that what degree of adherence was required to actually get reversal in all of our studies. And it was close to the 80 to 90, 100% of what we had to do. So you decide how much you want to change, but the idea is that if you're willing to make these changes, you're likely to get these benefits to the degree you're willing to make them.
That sounds awesome and very compassionate, but I feel like people just get drawn to like the quick fixes. And I feel like we've got one in the market right now, right? It's like the thing everybody's talking about, and that's not AI. That's the GLPs, right? I feel like GLP-1s are out there like Prozac used to go out a while ago. Do you have any thoughts on that?
By the way, you mentioned Prozac. We also measured in these 20,000 people almost a 50% reduction in depression scores when you really feel better, when you're empowering your life. And again, what we're looking for is longer life, and then you die in a couple weeks, as opposed to this, progressively deteriorating over time. And I think that's possible for most people. We've shown that we could lengthen telomeres, and with Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel for discovering them. So these simple changes can be quite powerful. In terms of where people go from here and what people want to do, that's really a personal decision. But my approach is to say, if you're willing to make these changes, these are the benefits you're likely to experience.
That's great. So I have a rapid fire question for you. 3 questions. So the first one is, what one food would you ban from the planet if you could?
Oh my. I think probably bacon, because it's so seductive. Many people really have a hard time not eating it, and yet it's really so toxic for you. So again, but I try to get away from the idea that it's one thing, It's not just diet even. It's all these things that make a difference. And there's a synergy that comes when you change a lot of things at the same time. The 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 10, not just 4. And with the GLP-1 drugs, yes, you can lose weight, but we found the average person lost 10 pounds. Of the 20,000 people, the average person lost 10 pounds and kept half that weight. In the randomized trials we did, they lost an average of 24 pounds, and they kept that weight off 5 years later. That's better data than Weight Watchers, but we're not focusing on weight, we're focusing on health. But for example, when you're eating foods that are lower in fat and sugar, they're less dense in calories. So even if you eat the same amount of food, you're getting fewer calories. I wrote a book about that years ago called Eat More, Weigh Less. We don't limit the amount of food people eat. We just change the type of food. And they usually come down to where they weighed in high school or college, and they level off, and they can sustain that over time.
That's fantastic. And what about your morning routine? Would you start with exercise? Would you start with meditation? And what food do you eat first?
Well, the best kind of exercise is the one that you like. If you like it, you'll do it. So, and again, studies are showing that a little goes a long way, and especially if you do high intensity training, even a few minutes of exercise can make a huge difference. So I try to do that every day. We have a pool, which I never had before until a few years ago, and it's heated, so I can swim laps in the morning. I grew up in Texas where exercise was always punishment. Go take a lap or give me 50 push-ups. And swimming was always fun, so now I get to swim, which makes it so much easier. But I also meditate first thing in the morning before I do anything. When the house is quiet, it's so much easier. And if you've ever hear a song on the radio first thing in the morning and you find yourself humming it later in the day, it's kind of the meditation stays with you at a subconscious level. So things don't really bother you as much. It's like I can be in the same environment, the same stresses, but they don't bother me as much. And so I can accomplish even more without getting stressed and sick in the process by doing that. And even a minute has value. So sometimes I'll play this little game with myself. Like, I've got so much to do. I don't have time to meditate today. It's like the little voice goes, well, do you have a minute? It's like, well, you have to argue that I don't have a minute, that it's like my life is so out of balance, I'd rather just do the minute. And of course, once I do the minute, chances are I'll do more, but even a minute has value.
Is there something that one could do instead of meditation that will have the same result?
Yeah, you can meditate in a secular level or you can meditate in a religious way. So repeating the Lord's Prayer or using rosary beads, or there are lots of ways of accomplishing the same goal. Truth is truth. It just manifests itself in different forms in different ways.
I see. So reading Wall Street Journal in the morning, that's not meditation.
No.
Okay, that's it. So real proper meditation. That's fantastic. And last question. So if you were to put something on a billboard that people can learn from, one thing, what would that be? What would it say? It reaches the world.
To reduce our lifestyle program to its essence is eat well, move more, stress less, love more. That'll fit on a billboard.
I love it. I just came up with it as you were talking about yoga. Can yoga be substituted for stretching and back and posture exercises?
Well, yoga is more than just stretching. Hatha yoga is the beginning of yoga. It's stretching, it's breathing, it's meditation, it's imagery. And ultimately, if you take it even further, the ancient swamis, and for that matter, rabbis and priests and monks and nuns and mullahs and whatever, didn't develop these techniques to lower their blood pressure, unclog their arteries, whatever. They're really powerful tools for quieting down our mind and body to experience more of an inner sense of peace and joy and well-being. That's really our natural state until we disturb it. And so much of our culture, particularly advertising, says you get your happiness, you get your health from outside yourself. You do these hacks, whatever, that makes you healthy. What these ancient traditions teach us, which is true, is that we have that already. There's a few genetic exceptions, but for the most part, we are happy and healthy until we disturb it. So the question shifts from how can I get what I think I need to be happy and healthy to how can I stop disturbing what's already there? And at the end of a meditation, whether you do that in a religious or secular way, you feel more peaceful. And it's important to note that the meditation didn't bring that to you. It was already there, but at least temporarily you weren't disturbing it. Now that may sound like parsing words and semantics, but the implications are really quite profound. Because if it's out there, then everybody who has what I think I need, more power, more money, more sex, more beauty, more accomplishment, whatever the usual things, then until I get it, I'm going to be stressed. If someone else gets it, I'm going to be really stressed. And even if I get it, it's great for a little bit, but then it doesn't last. As opposed to saying, what am I doing to disturb my own inner peace and well-being and health? Not to blame myself, but to empower myself, because I can do something about that. And then I can then go out in the world and accomplish even more, paradoxically, because I don't have all the anxiety associated with thinking I have to get all this stuff, to do that because it brings meaning to my life, not because I need that to be happy and healthy.
I feel healthy just having this conversation, Luba.
For an inspiration.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one last question. What's your guilty pleasure food when somebody puts that in front of you just can't resist and it's not part of your diet?
Oh yeah, chocolate for me. I kind of runs in my family, but I like to get the richest, fattiest dark chocolate that I can and do a little meditation around that. My wife does this wonderful meditation on our website where if you just, if you really pay attention to something that's sensual, food, sex, music, art, anything, massage, if you really give it your full attention, it's so much more pleasurable and you don't need as much of it. So like even a single piece of really high quality chocolate, I can make a 5-minute meditation out of just, feeling it crunch and then the tactile sensations, the overtones, the harmonics of taste as it bursts on the different parts of your palate. So, a little goes a long way if you really give it your full attention. That's part of the value of meditation as well.
Gosh, I love that. I always thought that dark chocolate is part of the healthy diet. It's included.
Yeah, it is, except for the sugar, but, small amounts of it really are healthy. It has a lot of isoflavones and other things that are really beneficial that keep your arteries dilated.
I usually take 80%, 90% dark chocolate bar before I eat it. To your point, I put it actually in a freezer because I like that the crunch of it. And then I take it out and I eat it. It's amazing.
Life can be very sensual. People think, am I going to live longer? Is it just going to seem longer if I live a healthy life? It's just the opposite. If you're really focused on what you're doing, it's more pleasurable, more fun, more sustainable. And by the way, the other reason for not eating meat is that more global warming is caused by livestock consumption than all forms of transportation combined. With the horrible fires we're seeing in Southern California now are a direct outgrowth of those kinds of things. People say, what can I do as one person to make a difference? Well, have a meatless Monday. Just something it takes also 14 times more global warming is caused by livestock consumption than all forms of transportation combined. It also takes 14 times more resources. So if you want to feed the hungry, we can free up 14 times more food by having people eat that way. The desertification, in the Amazon is, to clear cut to breed cattle and so on, not to mention the suffering of all these sentient beings. So whether you're looking at, what's personally sustainable is globally sustainable. And so if we can work on that level, then we can imbue our choices with meaning. And, one of the last thing I'll say is that when I meet with people, I'll say, why are you here? They say, well, I want to live longer. Well, why do you want to live longer? Wow, no one's ever asked me that. Doesn't everybody want to live longer? Well, no, I actually almost committed suicide when I was 19. A lot of people are really depressed. They're just trying to get through the day. So you say, oh, well, I don't know. I want to live longer so I can watch my kids grow up. I want to dance at their wedding. I want to write a book or whatever. If you can get people connected with a sense of meaning and attach that to why they're doing things, then it becomes much more sustainable as well.
I love it. You're an inspiration. Tell us and our audience, how do we reach you and how do we learn more?
Well, our website is ornish.com. So if we can be of service, the reason I got so suicidal when I was 19 was that I realized I could take all the meaning out of my life, but I learned that I could imbue my life with meaning by doing acts of service. So I'm grateful to you for the opportunity to do that here today. And I hope that at least someone's been inspired and at least some of it's been useful, because it makes me feel good to do that.
I'm definitely inspired. I'm going to do this diet, and I'm going to come back on here in a couple of months and report out on it.
Well, let's do another show a few months from now. You can tell us how you're doing.
I'll cut out meat. It's going to be hard, but I will try.
I'll write you a doctor's note.
Start with Mondays. I love it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, wow, what a great conversation with Dean. He's definitely the father of lifestyle medicine, as he's known. Lots of good little tips and tricks there. Eating avocado alone isn't going to do it. You've got to take a multimodal approach. Yeah?
And a lot of the things he said definitely resonated, and I completely agree with you and him. There are no quick fixes. And, you and I talk in this program quite a bit about people try to come up with quick fixes, cute little diets here and there, little exercise routines here and there, different meditation. But it's really not about that. It's your lifestyle. It's who you are. And I love that he said, you can, and by the way, it's the first time that I've ever heard this, which was, if you really want to reverse disease, you have to adhere to basically changing lifestyle about 80 to 100%. And that makes a lot of sense. If you want to prevent disease, you can do it much lower. You can do 30, 40%, and you can scale it up depending on how much you want to prevent disease. And that actually makes a lot of sense. And the fact that he has data on this is really phenomenal. I haven't even thought about that. What's been interesting is you and I, we talk about the different types of diets, and nutrition is medicine all the time. And I do try to live by that. So, and as CEOs and venture capitalist company builders, we're always out, we're always dining outside. And I try very hard to make sure that I'm eating healthy, even when I'm dining out. And almost always, and again, depends where, not so much in Los Angeles, or I was just in Laguna, you don't really have to do that, or San Diego where you are. But, most other places, I ask for substitutions, and, when everybody's sitting around, and also when you're probably, usually the only woman, it's a little weird to be asking, well, I'd like this on the side, I'd like that, I'd like sauce on the side. But what's been interesting is, I don't know if you've seen that too, but I would say probably over the last 3 to 4 years, when I do that, everybody around at the table says, I want the same thing. So it's funny because they order whatever it is off the menu, then they listen to me and they stop talking usually because they're curious about all of your crazy substitutions and what you're eating, because it's curious, somebody is making a big deal out of substitutions. But then, interestingly enough, they usually switch and they say, yeah, I'd like to have the same, but in the same style as she wants. So, it just shows you that people do want to have this as part of lifestyle.
But honestly, I have to say, it's really confusing when I hear about somebody with, I don't know, colitis that got on the carnivore diet and completely changed how they lived, and they're no longer feeling sick and they're up and moving around. I don't know what it's doing to their arteries or whatever, right? And then you hear about the Mediterranean diet and how that's amazing, and people live a healthy, longer life, and there are blue zones, right? There's the Pita Attia way of doing things, and there's the zone 2 exercise, and I'm sure diet, etc. So there's so many different types of advice out there. I wish that we would actually invest in doing some comparative trials, maybe, or data across these different types of diet and exercise programs, because I just don't think there's enough data to say this is better versus that. And there's also not enough data around personalization.
Yeah, I agree. But let me ask you another thing. So you're right, it would be very good to get data on what actually works for what population, for what disease, at what age, I'm sure. And again, is it intervention? Is it prevention? And when are you doing this? So I completely agree. The one thing that I think, and he mentioned that is the hardest for most people to do, is sticking with it. So it has to be part of who you are, in a sense. Let's say that we have all this data. We have everything, we publish it to everyone. What's the percentage of people do you think actually will stick with it for the rest of their lives?
And I feel like most people, to your point, if it's not part of who you are and how you live, aren't going to stick with it. And that change takes a really long time.
It's a hard to stick, and maybe part of it is, I mean, he also talked about loneliness and mental health, and it is perhaps having groups of people. So if someone or is your friend and inspiring you and can do this together, if you're a competitive person, maybe somebody can compete with you on, what they eat and how much they exercise versus you. Or if you're more collaborative, do some sort of a walking together, walking, talking, working. Things like that could work. Well, listen, thank you so much. It was great. Great to see you. I'll see you next week.
Nice to see you. And that was a great conversation.
Thanks for tuning in to Second Opinion. Share it with colleagues and friends and message us to let us know what topics you want to discuss on the podcast. If you want to support the show, the best ways are to leave a review wherever you're listening and make sure you are subscribed. And check out Christina's Second Opinion newsletter on Beehive. A link to subscribe is in the episode description. Second Opinion is part of Turpentine, the podcast network behind Turpentine DC, Age of Miracles, and more shows for experts by experts in tech.